guys, this is Oshi and this is going to be my VR2 Max Black. Her channel name is Max Black and the hashtag is Tarot90s Feel, and I'm cheating and I'm checking my phone. I first saw this tag on Don Michel's Boho Tarot's channel, and I was probably as excited as she was when I saw the tag, because I was like, yay, the 90s! Because, you know, I was born in 82, so I grew up in the 90s. I still to this day claim that the best pop music was made in the 90s and, you know, end of the 90s, early 2000. So, you know, you can fight me, I don't care. But this was a tag that I was like, yes, I want to do it. And when I watched the Don Michel's video, it was I think the day or after the day when I ordered one of the tags that is a crucial part for this tag to be made. So I had to wait until the tag arrived. And you know, if you watch my channel, you probably know which tag I'm talking about. But you know, let's start with the what the tag is all about. So it's pretty much how the 90s make you feel. So it's not you know, set in stone what you need to choose. It's just what the 90s means to you. And like I said, I was a teenager in the 90s, so it was an awkward and fun time. Plus I'm from Europe, you know, Eastern Europe, so it was after things from the West started to come in. We had those weekly magazines as well with, you know, pop idols and whatever. So it was a I know that, you know, I was a child pretty much, you know, I was young. I had no idea what was going on in the background, and I was sheltered and safe. So I remember more of the good things than probably what went on in the world. But for me, you know, it was not everything was fun, but overall it wasn't as bad as a lot of people's, you know, teenage years. I wasn't popular, I was awkward as well, just like everybody else. But I think most of my problem was an Eight of Swords stage. I made it up in my head that I had these issues, which then later on, you know, as you grow up, you realize that, oh boy, that wasn't even that, you know, serious as you experienced it back then. But this is what growing up is all about. But first tag is going to be, and before I start, I didn't had tarot back then. I don't think I knew what tarot was, and this made me realize that I missed a tag. So I'm just gonna, you know, pretend okay, I have it. I'm gonna pretend that this is not the first tag that I wanted to show you guys. So like I said, I'm just doing it because I'm excited. So back then there was no tarot, and as you can just see that I'm excited but not necessarily well prepared for this VR. The only divination system that I knew about was gypsy cards, because there's a lot of gypsy people, and that's the name I use, because the Romani that a lot of people like to use these days it sounds different, and it sounds something else in, you know, to Hungarians. So for us, this is not the derogatory term. This is how people usually prefer to be called. So I'm just, you know, that's why I'm using it. I'm not saying it's true for everyone, but who I know it's true for. But, and as you can see, this is a craptastic, like really cheap deck that I recently got, because I was like, oh, I should learn this one as well. And it's similar to Lenormand, you know, it's more about the fortune telling side. So I only knew about palm reading and gypsy cards back then, but my understanding was that if you're not a gypsy or you don't have, you know, heritage, you're not supposed to use these, and you know, it's not yours to play with if you're not from there. Which is, I don't know where the gatekeeping was coming from. Maybe misinformation, maybe I ran into someone who, you know, said it. It was all, you know, oh, mysterious and, ooh, we don't know what's going on and we're not gonna talk about it kind of thing. So it was more on the, oh, I don't wanna get a card reading because it's gonna just tell me that I'm gonna die or something like that. So this was my first introduction to divination, and ooh, look at the video. There's a lot of language here. So you can learn languages with this card as well. But I didn't use it. That was the only thing that I knew as, you know, and it was a big thing here, as divination. Yeah, I don't think I want to say anything more. So that's the first thing. The second one is not going to be the one that I showed you. It's going to be the Star Codes Astro Oracle. Obviously, we didn't have Oracle decks either back then, but horoscopes, especially daily and weekly horoscopes in magazines, because, you know, we had those, it was a huge thing. And it's funny because I'm going to show you a few cards while I can talk. The funny thing is that, you know, I always check mine. And back then when I was young, I didn't really connect with the everything that was said for Aquarius, not just, you know, these bullshit daily and weekly readings, but what Aquarius was all about. I don't think that I was embodying Aquarius at all back then. Look at this gorgeous card. But I still, you know, I checked it, and if it was like, oh, you're gonna meet someone and you're gonna fall in love, I was always so hopeful for stuff like that. And we kind of took the negative as well a bit too serious. So yeah, that's not a good thing, but that was such a part of my, you know, younger years to check those weekly magazines and whatever for horoscopes, because the 19th was, at least for me, that part, the second half was all about that, you know. Everything was written in the stars, and, you know, obviously now I know what a bullshit job they did back then in those magazines, but and I know that, you know, horoscopes are much more about than, you know, what we read in those magazines. But back then that was something that we kind of took seriously, and, you know, it was part of our lives to check the horoscopes and just, you know, see if something is gonna be coming and stuff like that. The tarot deck that kind of embodies the 90s for me, I think. And obviously I missed that on the second deck, now that I realized, but it's not as far away. Let me see. Is the Light Seers, because if I think about the 90s and the early 2000s, which I kind of grouped together for me as my teenage years, I kind of think about all the colors and all the music and all the, you know, not hippie, because, you know, it wasn't hippie, obviously, but there was a lot of, at least for me, because, you know, I was into pop music. I tried to listen to alternative music because one of my friends, who is pretty much my, you know, in a relative status right now, because she's just part of the family. We were not friends in high school when we met, not immediately, but she became one of my closest friends over the years. And she was very much into Nirvana and I don't even know, you know, other type of alternative music like that. But I don't think I ever, even when I'm depressed, I'm not into that kind of depressive state. And even though I really liked My Chemical Romance as well, I was never an emo girl. I just loved the music. And I always preferred colors and everything. And I was just thinking that I had a pair of jeans that I really loved, and it started to, you know, fall apart. They were whole on my ass and stuff like that. So I should have thrown it out, but instead I found some striped, really colorful piece of fabric, and I sewn into it, so it kind of looked like it was, you know, on purpose. And I just loved doing that. I loved modifying my clothes with colors. I didn't do it as often as, you know, other people, but come on, give me a heavy card. Oh, nostalgia, perfect. Six of Cups. But that was more about, and yes, you know, shirts like this was also a thing. I had like 3 at least. I had a favorite blue and green checkered one. Are they like plates, I think? And I had one with white and the Bordeaux colors, which I loved. And they probably looked really bad on me and they didn't suit me, but I just loved wearing them. So, you know, I never been into fashion. Fashion doesn't make sense to me. When I look at things that people are like, oh, this is the new style and this is the new it, and I'm like, how could you even wear that? So yeah, fashion and me are not, like we're not in the same page ever. But I loved color and I loved wearing color, and I loved being around color. So that's why the Light Sears is pretty much my 90s deck, because it has all the colors that I love. Okay, next one is, since I talked a lot about music, and this was the deck that I had to wait for. This is the Britney Spears Oracle, because, oh my god, Britney has a, I mean, unfortunately it's not from Britney, which would make it 10 times more better. But I grew up and she was my idol, or I don't even know. She was the one that, I was fantasizing about being, because there's like 2 months between us. We're the same age, and even though now I know how much shit she went through, which I didn't know, obviously, I always looked at whatever she was doing and I was like, oh, I want to be like her. And I loved the music. I loved how she looked, and stuff like just, her hair, for example. I really loved her hair and I wished mine was like that, which it wasn't. But, she's my pop princess and she will always be my favorite artist because of that, because I grew up with her pretty much. I became an adult and went through shit as well, different kind, but, and her music, and she was there for me in a way that I could imagine that someday, and I'm not gonna start saying, some things might be different. So, like Britney is the 90s music, and NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys and East 17, and kind of Take That, even though, there was a rivalry between East 17 and Take That, and just like NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, it's pretty much if you loved one of them, you couldn't love the other one. Which is kind of, it's so ridiculous now, but I remember that, I was an East 17 fan, so that by default meant that I couldn't Take That. But they had a few really good songs, and I remember that I was crushing on Mark really hard because he was so cute. But obviously, it wasn't something that you could admit publicly, so these are funny things. But, Take That is back, and they have really good music now. So it's yeah, that's just funny. So that's my pretty much 90s music deck, which I'm so freaking happy about that it's not even. I have a walk and a flip through if you're curious about my first squilly impressions of this deck, which is completely biased. What I also loved doing, which I still love doing, is reading. And I was thinking about, I love children's book and children's stories. Just like I still read it's YA. It's so weird because it's YA how you say it, young adult books in English, but because we pretty much say how we Hungarian is a type of language when what you see on the paper is what you say, so it's pretty much yeah in Hungarian because the Y would be pronounced like that. So I need to remind myself that it's not how it's pronounced. Just like Hermione's name is Hermione in Hungarian because that's how it's written. So yeah, so I love. So this is the stories, The Little Prince. Even though it's a sad story, and I didn't remember a lot about it when I got the deck. I just knew that I had sad feelings about the deck, and then I read the story now as an adult reread it, and I was like, oh my god, this is heartbreaking, and I was crying like a baby. But I still, if you want to feel like that, then go ahead and read the book and buy the deck. This is such a great deck, and I hate that I don't use it as often as it should be used because it reads well, it connects really well to the story, and I just love the style. Obviously, it's watercolor. What do you expect from me? But yeah, this reminds me of all the books that I pretty much devoured when I was, young. I loved the reading. Reading was always something that I really enjoyed, and that took me out from The Misery of My Young Life, which sounds ridiculous comparing to what came after, but hey, you don't know that when you're growing up. So that's The Terror of the Little Prince for all the books that I've read as a teenager. Next one, still staying in the book, realm, or TV shows and movies. One of the big thing for me growing up was sci-fi. And I don't have a good. I have the Neon Moon Tarot, but it's even though that's a great deck, it's still not my kind of sci-fi deck. So when I was thinking about showing you guys, if you haven't seen it, I also have a flip and a walkthrough. This is a storytelling deck. It's called the Shadow World, and it's a card game pretty much. And you can see, it's that sort of a sci-fi world that I was always interested in or drawn to in books. And I read so many sci-fi books when I was Werewolf, go away, you don't belong here. When I was growing up, I pretty much read through all of my father's books because he was the one who read fantasy and sci-fi in our household, and then I picked up on it. By the time I was like 13 or something, because I was secretly reading books that I wasn't supposed to be when I was like 11 years old and stuff like that. Thinking now back what I was reading, and I was like, why are you reading that? But I was fascinated by it. So this deck, which can be used for divination as well, because it's like a giant oracle. You can build stories with it. You can just use it as an oracle. It's a great one, and this reminds me of the sci-fi era for me that was really important in books. And I can't really name anything because I mostly read Hungarian ones, but Douglas Adams, for example. I'm trying to think and look at I read more fantasy than sci-fi, that's for sure, because I didn't really had as much access to sci-fi that I had to fantasy. And for the fantasy one, it's gonna be the Dungeons and Dragons. Even though I didn't play the game, just like how I talked about it in my walkthrough, this pretty much embodies how I look at fantasy and what I love about fantasy. And growing up and being in the 90s and reading fantasy books and imagining that I will walk through a portal and become a warrior and I meet dragons, it's not a new thing for me. I did that since I pretty much started reading and I didn't stop. But yeah, so for the fantasy element of the 90s, for me that was a really big thing. I had quite a few classmates in high school who loved fantasy, so I wasn't alone with it, which is great. Unfortunately, this game wasn't, even if it was around, I don't think it was, but even if it was around, it was solely for boys, because girls didn't play games, not computer games and not games like that, because girls don't do that. Bullshit was still in full effect. Thank God it's gone now, honestly. But yeah, this is for my fantasy. All the fantasy books and whatever that I spent my teenage years reading and watching, but mostly reading, because there wasn't such a big selection of TV shows back then, especially not for us. That came later in the 2000s, I guess. This is not the last one, but there's only one deck left. But Supernatural obviously wasn't around for the 90s, but this embodies the TV shows that I spent so much time watching. And if I had, I can't remember when Buffy, started. But I'm kind of thinking about, watching things like Buffy, and if not Buffy, but TV shows like with vampires, and I don't even know, but stuff like that. So I know I watched a lot of TV shows back then and movies, but mostly TV shows, I think. The ones that we got. So I kind of, thought that Supernatural would have been a type of show that I would have enjoyed watching back then. I think. So instead of all the TV shows, oh, look at that. We have these things. I mean, these characters, and I'm distracted. That's why I'm not really making any sense. But yeah, this is for my TV shows. And the last deck is not gonna be a surprise if you know me. Shouldn't be. If you don't know me, then welcome to my channel, and this is your introduction to Or She Believes in Dragons. And obviously it's the Smoke, Ash and Amber. I grew up loving dragons. Oh, that's prettier. And it started with a tiny one-headed one. Not tiny. It was a puppet theater kind of show, a Hungarian one, which I watched since I was a child, and I still love those stories to this day because they were just made so well. And I think that started the dragon loving thing for me, and I always loved them and I always look for them in stories, and this deck is just perfect for my kind of dragons because they look the way that I imagine dragons, especially this tiny one. So yeah, this is my dragon deck because my love for dragons started from childhood, which was in the 90s, but it was very much full-on effect when I was a teenager because I was buying all the books with all the stories that had dragons in them. That was a deciding factor for me when I went and spent my pocket money every month on buying books. I always picked up something if there was one with dragons. So obviously I had to include them. So yeah, this is, I think it's kind of relatively short. I hope I didn't, blabber too much, but this was such a fun, thing to think about and think about mostly the better things, because that part of my childhood was still, better than, like I said, what came after. So yeah, this was fun, and I'm just so grateful that this deck was created. And if you don't, if you make or post a VR to this deck, please do let me know so I can look for it. Or if you don't want to do that, leave a comment with your, what's your selection of decks for the 90s. What do you think about when you think about the 90s? Do you think about the music? Do you think about something else? Just do let me know. And yeah, thank you so much for being here. Please like, subscribe, comment down below, share this video with others, and see you in the next one. Bye!